This episode is brought to you by FX's The Beauty Official Podcast. Join host Evan Ross Katz on the official podcast for FX's hottest new series, The Beauty, taking you behind the scenes with its amazing stars as they discuss the show's most jaw-dropping moments. Featuring Evan Peters, Anthony Ramos, Jeremy Pope, Ashton Kutcher, Rebecca Hall, Bella Hadid, Meghan Trainor, Isabella Rossellini, Jessica Alexander, and Ari Grainer. Search FX's The Beauty wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to Unpacked, 5 Questions, a podcast that takes you behind the scenes of one great travel story. I'm Katherine LaGrave, executive editor at Afar. I'm pretty lucky. I get to brainstorm, assign, and edit features for our print magazine. And in our latest issue, we published a series of stories focused on epic trips. You know, the kind of trips that push you outside your physical and mental comfort zones. The challenging, thrilling, complicated ones. For the next 4 weeks on Unpacked, 5 Questions, I'll be interviewing the writers and photographers who took and shared these trips to understand what it was like, the moments they're still thinking about, and what they wish they'd known before their trip. Ryan Knighton is one of those people. An Afar contributing writer, Ryan is a memoirist, screenwriter, surfer, and consultant for TV shows like Billions. Ryan is also blind, and it is largely for this reason, he told me, he never really had any interest in going to Peru. What would be the point in merely listening to people look at legendary mountain views and Incan ruins, he'd quip. But when the opportunity to join a trip to Peru with Intrepid Travel came along, he decided to open his mind and ears. Surprises of the very best kind awaited. Hi, Ryan. So nice to be speaking with you again.
You too.
So this was your first trip to South America, and why had you not really considered Peru before?
It's so great to have. Why did you not do something?
Why did you completely rule out a country?
I wouldn't say I completely ruled it out. It just didn't really. It's one of the places that I just didn't have a lot in my blind man's imagination of the visual world from before I lost my sight. I just didn't have a lot of references for it. So it never really popped up as a place I wanted to go to fulfill some sort of exploration of something I knew. Like it sounds funny, but it's like, you know, when I lost my sight in my late teens, it's not like I'd seen a ton of images of a lot of South America, but I mean, Machu Picchu was kind of one of the only ones I could remember of Peru. So yeah, it was one of those things that it wasn't a lack of desire to go there. It was just a truly big unknown. Some places in my mind are less unknown in that way than others. Some have some sort of familiarity from my sighted days. And I feel like I'm going back into explore the version of my memory versus what I encounter. And in Peru, it was like, welcome to the blank slate. See what you discover through your remaining 5 senses. 5 senses? 4 senses? How many do we have? 6. 5. 5. We don't have 6. We have 5. What am I saying? My remaining 4 senses. Sorry, it's because I'm always arguing we have 6, but we don't really.
Wait, what would the 6th one be?
Proprioception. The sense of how hard to push on something, say to move it, and where your body is relatively in space, to like where your hands are relative to other parts of your body. That feeling. Anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Well, I could be convinced, but that sounds like a very cool topic for another podcast. But speaking of senses, and one of the things you write in the story is all of the sound, and you have some beautiful scenes. You head to the Amazon on day 2 of the trip, and immediately, almost, you're out walking in the rainforest without much time to adjust. What was that like?
It was really overwhelming, particularly at night. And not in a bad way, like overwhelming in a very cool way. Like I've lived most of my life as an urban creature, less so now. And one of the things that the Amazon really reminded me of is how much sound a city takes away from the natural world, and how little of the sound of the natural world creeps through a city, that it is dominated by tires and sirens and, you know, the sounds of a city. But in the Amazon, I was just shocked how loud it is. Because I live very rural now on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and it is like a vacuum of sound here because there's very few people around. Like at night, there's just no sound out here. There's no birds. There's no nothing. The Amazon at night is Dolby sound. It's just, between howler monkeys and insects and just critters. And it's very hard to describe unless you go there how constant the thrum of the jungle is. When you spend time sitting with it, as I did being an insomniac who was awake during the night listening to all this, I was trying to pick out different sounds, like even of the insects, because there's just so many going on. And you can identify the little patterns that you missed like 20 minutes ago. And it's like, that's the sound I hadn't heard. Anyway, it was truly a really big buffet for the ears. Maybe in another life, I would have been a biologist, because there's always that frustration of not being able to put the name to things you're hearing. I love it when guides, like the dudes in the Amazon that took us around, were really great in the daytime about picking out when something, like there'd be a noise in the distance and maybe 3/4 of us didn't notice it, but some of us did, and they would just identify what it was as we continued with whatever we were doing. And I just love when the landscape around me has words given to it, and the reality behind things are revealed, so it's not just a mystery sound or a mystery sighting of something to people. So anyway, the Amazon was just orchestral. It was really, I highly recommend people go listen to the Amazon sometime.
I love that. I was there in Peru. I think you and I spoke about this before, maybe a year before you'd gone, and sort of the constant buzz of something.
Did you find that too?
Just layers and yeah, absolutely.
As a sighted person, was it overwhelming to you, or were you able to did you have to pay attention to it?
No, I did find it overwhelming, particularly mostly at night when I had limitations in what I could see. But you write about some of the thumps and some of the things that you hear, and it's just layer upon layer of noise.
That is the first time I've ever heard a howler monkey too. In all my travels, I'd never heard one before. Like, I didn't know it was a howler monkey. I didn't know that was what was happening at first thing in the morning. And I heard it, and I'm like, what is this? Like, are they tarring the roofs or something?
It's quite a noise.
It's really something.
So the Amazon was such an epic part of the trip. You also write about experiencing Machu Picchu and walking these rope bridges in the rainforest. There are so many epic moments in the story. What is one that you think about the most?
I kind of think about two things. One is I think about the first step I took onto one of those rope bridges in the Amazon, because it truly was like we were up, 80 feet in the air, 100 feet in the air. And these bridges are, they have rope railings, rope bottoms with ironwood slats across them. And as I write, they were kind of occasional sometimes, like they weren't necessarily as predictable. It wasn't dangerous, but it was like you had to pay attention. And you could feel the fraying on some of the ropes because they were old. I mean, the Amazon is constantly eating everything that you try to build in it. And the preservation of that is something else to begin with. And those ironwood slats are incredibly sturdy. But anyway, stepping onto that rope bridge, it swung and it bounced, and I had to go alone, and I couldn't use my cane, which made me feel even more vulnerable. And, the advice was just to lightly rest my hands on the rope bridge and use it for guidance, but don't grab it because you sort of collapse the structure of it if you wrench it around a bunch. It's just to guide you lightly. Mm-hmm. So stepping onto that bridge, I'd sort of been coached about it before we went up, and other people had crossed it already. And I could hear people when they were rocking across one at a time, like, whoa.
Which is always what you want to heir right before you do something.
Exactly. And, my blind man's mind's eye is going, what is going on up there? What is it like? How long do we go? And when I stepped on, there was that moment of trust where it's like everybody said I could do it. We had one guide on the other end of the bridge, one at the end where I was. So on the other end, they were making sound. So I had sort of a beacon of how far I had to go and what direction. But there's that moment of trust stepping on, saying, okay, I'm going to do this. And you are literally stepping into the void. It's just like stick your foot off this platform and there will be something if you reach down a little bit. And when you're up in the trees, that feels like a big ask. So that moment sticks with me a lot, because it's literally like you're stepping off the edge of the world into something that you've never experienced before. And I've never been through a canopy walk like that. And then the other thing that I end up thinking about is just Like Machu Picchu is such a bucket list thing for so many people. And I think about that, say, in a comparable way to, say, Petra in Jordan. When I went to Jordan, it's like a bucket list thing. It's one of the big architectural ancient sites, both of them. And in my case, they were actually both the least compelling part of the trip to me as a blind person because they were so visually driven. Whereas that canopy walk was so sensory oriented. You're hearing birds below you, which is odd. And you're swinging way up, and you can hear insects clearer that you couldn't hear as clearly from the bottom. And the smell is different up there because you're up in the canopy. Anyway, it's an atypical way, I think, of having a bucket list where that was the thing that stuck out to me, not the grand and lauded Machu Picchu in the same way. I mean, it was amazing too, don't get me wrong, but it's as a blind person, it didn't nearly as impact me as that canopy walk did.
Mm-hmm. And there's also something about when we travel, we have these ideas of places that inform how we experience them, right? Your expectation of a place. I experienced that similarly in Machu Picchu, where I'd felt kind of, I mean, even as a sighted person, I feel like I've experienced this in some ways, and not all of the ways, of course, but it was familiar to me because it's in our conversation and it's a reference point.
And it's so documented, like visually. Yeah.
Yeah.
There is that kind of, feeling like you're stepping inside, I imagine, a photograph, like where the image of the thing is more real when you get there than the thing itself, because you've seen it so many times.
Mm-hmm.
I love going to places like going to Peru. When I went to Bhutan for the magazine, I love going to places that I have no reference for. Like it's not something that my mind has much to pull from. So it is a strange experience and I don't know if sighted people can have it as much of like stepping into a world that unknown to you. It's not like I can look anything up and prepare myself, So
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. Is there a moment from the trip that you were particularly fond of that didn't necessarily make it into the story, right? We're trying to fit 9 or so days into 2,500 words.
Yes, there is.
A very challenging task, but yeah, 1 or 2. I'd love to know a little bit behind the scenes of what's on the cutting room floor.
There was one moment that I actually tried to write about, and I couldn't really make it fit into the story because it felt a little too sort of slowed things down too much. It was a moment that the guide from Intrepid that we were with for this one day, it was after we left Cusco. So we were going from Cusco to Machu Picchu. We were taking a bus from the capital of Cusco through the Sacred Valley to catch the train. And it was, I think, about a couple-hour trip. And halfway through, we stopped at some Incan ruins outside of Cusco, which, I don't know, maybe we spent an hour there. And like many of the Incan ruins, it's mostly walls that we end up sort of still seeing there and then imagining the rest or extrapolating the rest. And the guide was explaining to us how these walls were built. And, I make reference to this in the article that the Incans didn't have a written calculating language. Like there was no written mathematics. Of course, there's no calculators or anything like that. And what the guy did was, because he knew I was coming, he was going to show people an image of how the Incans would actually do mathematics. And of course, that wouldn't help me much, and it was complicated to describe. So he made a little, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like, take it like an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardboard, and then he laid a grid on it that was slightly raised. So like using, it's sort of like sticks. Right? So you create almost like a tic-tac-toe cross, a bunch of them. And he had a bunch of little rocks, and he explained the way this grid would work numerically, not unlike an abacus. And then he had me moving the rocks around and doing calculations with him while he described this to everybody and how it worked. And I tried to write about it, and even as you can hear me try to describe it, I can't really do it very well. And I'm like, this is not that interesting, I suppose, unless you'd been there. But if you'd been there and you were a blind person, it was just amazing. It was like somebody taught me a totally different way to do mathematics using pebbles and a grid, and I didn't have to see anything. And it was bizarre because, it wasn't like the Incans were blind people, but they'd actually made a tactile system of doing mathematics that was using rocks and grids, and you move them around for, the categories like tens, hundreds, and thousands. And that's how they could keep track of inventory while they were building things. They could keep track of food while they were away building things. And I suppose it's sort of related in spirit to the way they would communicate across the valley by transporting the knot system that they would use. They would take, alpaca yarn, which is everywhere, much to my wife's joy as a knitter. And I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. Because, of course, paper would degrade. Like, it's hard to preserve things. But like a string is a durable thing. And they would tie knots to symbolize different things, maybe numerical things, or they'd use colors for categories of things. So maybe it was food inventory, or it was people, keeping track of populations. And they would have runners that would take these strings, almost like mop heads, across the valley and run them between villages and cities. And again, it's like a system that's very tactile, because the communication is being done through feeling these threads. You could see them too, but you can feel them. And much like that mathematical grid that I was being shown with the pebbles, again, it was a tactile system of recording things and communicating things over time and distance. That stuck with me because it's sort of fascinating, and it's a little academic and a little abstract, so I didn't feel like it really kind of fit in the article very well. But personally, it was kind of mind-blowing. I've lamented for years, we went to screens that have lost all buttons. Like I remember phones that had buttons, and I loved that world. It worked so well for me.
Mm-hmm.
And now everything's just touchscreens, and the tactile dimension of how I used to manipulate my world has diminished. So there's an Incan thing there that I completely identify with, and I wish we would return to.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
As your editor, I have I don't know if it's the easier or the harder job, but of cutting your story down and saying, no, get it to this length, do this. For you, what was the hardest part about writing the story?
I find the hardest thing in this particular case was structuring a story based on a trip that had been planned prior to me doing it. So many of the trips I've done for Afar and other places have been me driving something forward once I get there based on what I find and based on my curiosity. So I'm sort of building a story while I'm in it. And I'm doing things that I think what I've experienced so far will help lead to in the story. And so going to a trip that had an itinerary for 9 days that was already planned, along with 10 other people who have their own ideas of what they want to do. We're covering a lot of ground between Lima and the Amazon and Cusco and Machu Picchu. You spend a lot of time getting between places because it's the Andes. It's a difficult landscape and there's a lot of distance. In that sense, that was to me the struggle, is to find the narrative shape of a story that had already been planned out from beginning to end, and trying to retrofit a story shape inside an itinerary shape, if you know what I mean. That's always the challenge, I think, with travel writing, is you're always a little afraid, like, is there going to be a story, not just are there going to be events?
I do remember that.
Yeah. Ira Glass had said to me years ago on This American Life that an interesting life isn't the same thing as an interesting story. And I think some travel experiences have a similar thing built into them. really. An interesting trip isn't the same as an interesting story about a trip.
Yes, that's very true. But in this case, I do think that we ended up with both. So I'm happy about that.
That's the work.
That's the work. What do you wish you'd known before this trip? So what's your advice for travelers who might follow in your footsteps?
I think if I could do it again, I would say spend as much time in the Amazon as you can. I feel like I could have spent even longer there, and that's not to shortchange the Intrepid itinerary. It's just like there was a lot of stuff we wanted to see. But now that I know what's there, I wish I'd spent way more time in the Amazon. I think I could have really dug in there and had an amazing experience simply in the jungle. I wish I'd known how much distance there was between everything, because at least for me as a blind person, when I'm in a bus moving between places, I'm sort of kept away from the world. Like I'm not hearing, I'm not smelling it. Everything is just a rumor out the window. So I think sighted people, I think, travel differently than I do that way, that they still have an experience of Peru out the window. They're still sort of connecting where they were to where they're going through that landscape and what they're seeing. Whereas I get kind of withheld from it. And it's like I pop out of the time machine, one place, then I'm in another one. And the time in between is a bus. I think for me, I think I would have actually probably gone to fewer places and spent longer in each one. But I think, some of these trips are designed so that you can actually really get a sense of the variety of what's out there. I mean, Lima is not like Cusco, and Machu Picchu is nothing like the Amazon. And there's just such extremes in Peru, both of height and of landscape. Like you're one day up in the Andes and the next you're down in the Amazon basin. Lima, not far south of it, it's desert. And then outside my hotel, people are surfing. So it's so hard to pick what kind of experience you want in Peru, because the entire spectrum seems to be there, which this trip really showed me. And now that I know that, I can pick where I'd like to even go back and spend longer at, and what I'd like to do even more of. And for me, of course, that's just the Amazon. It was amazing.
Hmm. And this was also your first group tour, and you share a bit in the beginning of the piece about these feelings of apprehension as sort of, how is this whole thing going to work? And give us a little bit of insight into how you felt at the end of the trip and why.
So I ended up writing a bit about the group tour element because, like you say, I'd never been on one before. And, there was about 12 of us on this trip. And, there was a real mix of people from Australia and New Zealand and Ireland and, we're the Canadians. And my wife had pointed out, Tracy had pointed out, I've written a lot about guides over the years as both a traveler and a blind person, and how those two things intersect. Like I'm being guided all the time. So I have a bit of a connoisseurship of what I think makes a good guide for me as a blind person. But also when I'm traveling, the idea of guidance itself is a bigger idea, because whoever is guiding me is mitigating my experience of that place. They become part, if not inextricable, to that place, because they were the way I knew it, right? They're telling me what I'm not seeing. They're orienting me to stuff. The guide is seeing things that might be interesting to me and take me over to it. And in this case, it was a different idea of guidance because there was a big group of us. It wasn't just one person whose elbow I was on and who was solely focused on my experience. I was now in a mix with a bunch of other people who had their own expectations and had their own interests. And how do we collaborate together to make this trip collectively satisfying for everybody? And I could feel at the beginning, when everybody saw me sit down very awkwardly with my white cane, that trepidation in the room of like, oh no, he's going to slow us down. And it's a legitimate response. It's like, how is this going to work? We're going up to Machu Picchu. Is he going to fall off the cliff and that'll be the end of the trip? And so for me, the experience of the group travel was interesting because it was like there was a kind of collaboration amongst all of us of like, who's going to guide Ryan today? And somebody would guide me for a while and I'd chat with them, and somebody else would guide me for a while and I'd chat with them. And then, I would try things like going up and doing the canopy walk. And I read about, this hotelier, Rick, who had a real fear of heights, but because I was doing it, he was going to do it too. And it just became this thing that you start as a group of strangers, and by the end, you become a platoon. You become something like a tribe or a group of friends because you've gone through a lot of stuff together that nobody else has gone through with you. And the bond gets stronger, and you realize at the end, like, I can't separate my group I traveled with from my experience of Peru. They are my experience of Peru as much as Peru is. That's, I think, part of the fun of group travel is you're kind of taking a gamble on how this random group of strangers is going to color the experience of your place you're going to, And everybody here was super helpful to me. They really helped me have an experience, which, it isn't always guaranteed. Getting me through Machu Picchu for 3.5 hours without falling off is an accomplishment. And everybody took turns. Anyway, I have fond feelings for everybody for that reason. And it was a very different idea of guidance because I'd never had that idea of a group guiding me, not just a person.
Yeah, you write so beautifully about some of these people on your trip helping open up the destination for you and vice versa, as you talk about, right? Which I think is such an important point of whether it's a group tour or just traveling with someone else or a group of friends or a group of family, right? Like we all affect each other's travel experiences, and what someone else does can inspire someone else. So it's a really beautiful through line to your story and a connection to a bigger idea in travel that I love.
It's also, to me, interesting how a group tour, people come with different calibrations of what they want from the trip and their own past with travel. So you learn, like, some people like to go through a group tour like this because they are too overwhelmed by the decisions they're going to have to make, maybe, of like, I don't want to miss anything. I want to make sure that I get to all the stuff. And so having the authority of Intrepid plan that for you and deliver that to you and make sure that you get to all the places and help you with the logistics and removing all those friction points, for some people is really important. And you can see them sort of settle into the trip over a couple days, like they sort of relax into it. And it's like, oh yes, these were the people that were really nervous. And then there's other people who, like me, who are just like, have traveled a ton. And the difference this time is I'm actually giving over my curiosity to somebody else and letting them manage it,
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that meant, oh, so this is a trip where I don't just notice something and wander off. It's a little different this time. This time I've said, you show me stuff and I will follow. And it is a kind of following that you're doing. And that's not to say you're disengaged, but it's a different way of traveling because you're not driving the bus. And that's a different experience, and it's not a lesser one. It's just a completely different way of traveling. Again, like, I hadn't experienced that before, and it was fun to sort of lose yourself in the mix of other people's expectations, comfort zones. There's collaborating and compromising, and all that goes into group travel.
And it turns into, I think, a fascinating story. So I love how it turned out. I hope you're happy with it as well. And I realize we should have been drinking Pisco Sours for this.
Pisco Sours, man.
Listener, thank you for tuning in to this special Epic Trips episode of Unpacked 5 Questions. In the show notes, you'll find a link to Ryan's story and to his social media handles. Join me in December for another episode that takes you behind the scenes with our award-winning features writers. Ready for more interviews with travel writers? Visit afar.com and be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. We are at Afar Media. If you enjoyed today's exploration, I hope you'll come back for more great travel stories. Subscribing always makes that easy. And be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other travelers find it. This has been Unpacked 5 Questions, a production of Afar Media. The podcast is produced by Aislinn Green, Nikki Galtaland, and Katherine LaGrave. The podcast is part of Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like Culture Kids and the Explorers Podcast.